Okay, for today, thankfully, the lesson is just about factoring. And so we have factored so many times that on our top 20 that gives me more time to review with you, because this chapter is pretty intense if you hadn't noticed. Like, I can give you one equation, y equals negative x minus 3 squared plus 1. And from that, I can ask you like 10 things. And I'm going to go through one of these with you. The homework quiz that you had for your homework for last night had a bunch like this, where they'd say, okay, so now what's the y-intercept? What's the x-intercept? What is the vertex? Is it a vertex? Is it a maximum or is it a minimum? There's so many things you have to know. So let's talk about factoring first, though, because that is the lesson for today. So how on earth could you factor that? First of all, it is not factored. Just because it has a parenthesis doesn't mean it's factored. Yes? I agree. You'd use PEMDAS, which, by the way, is one of there's problems exactly like this in the top 20. Why is it on the top 20? Because that means it's one of the 20 most used, most important algebra things we do. You got to know how to multiply this puppy out. If you haven't figured it out yet, it means x minus 3 times x minus 3 and then plus 1. Is that factored? No. Just because there's two parentheses sitting there doesn't mean it's in factored form. It needs to be multiplied all the way out, and then what you get, that answer, that can be factored. So this is vertex form. We are multiplying it out, and we're going to get general form. Generally, you just have to multiply them out to get general form. So go ahead, multiply that thing out. Careful with the negative. A lot of people can't handle that much detail. I'm going to pause while you do that. Okay, let's see if you got that figured out. This part first, then make all of that negative, and then add 1. Show you. Okay, so this is the first part, x squared. And will I make it negative? Yep, I will, but later. To start with, I'm just going to multiply that all out. X squared, outside and inside make negative 6x. Negative 3 times negative 3 is plus 9. Then I got to remember that there's a negative outside of all of that. I like to do it with a parentheses like this. All right. Then I'm going to say plus 1 at the end. Now I'm going to multiply that negative out. You okay? Yeah. You don't look like yourself today. All right. So I'm multiplying this out, and I get negative x squared. And then I get plus 6x. And then I get minus 9. And then I have to add 1 at the end. What's minus 9 and then add 1? Minus 8. So I'm going to just put those together and make that a minus 8. Now here's the tricky part. You're supposed to factor that. You have never once been asked to factor something when there's a negative in front. You know why? Because it's really hard. So I wouldn't do it. What do you mean? I wouldn't do it. Just refuse to do the question? No. I would factor out the negative 1 first. And then get x squared minus 6x plus 8. And then that will factor nicely and easily. Take a moment and just factor that. Now, for those of you that are still in the learning stage on factoring, what I just did probably blew your mind. I just took a negative out of everything and put it in the front. You can do that? Yes, I can make everything the opposite by factoring out a negative 1. Then this becomes positive x squared, and this becomes negative 6x, and that becomes positive 8. Okay, but why did I do that? Because now I can factor it with 2 sets of parentheses. And again, here's where a lot of kids are not good at factoring. Let me try to help. You, at this point, when the lead coefficient, the number here is only a 1, you can use that little rule that these 2 question marks have to multiply to 8 and add to negative 6. There's something that'll do that? Yes. They must be negative. In fact, to have a negative here, I have to have at least 1 negative, but do you get to have a positive here? I actually have to have 2 negatives. I know this has to be a minus and a minus, because that way they will multiply to a positive 8, and they will add to a negative 6. And somebody's got to figure it out by now. What is it? X minus what? And x minus what? And x minus 2. There you go. After all of that work, what do we get? We still have a parabola, except now I see this and I go, I know it hits at 4, and I know it hits at positive 2. And I know it's an upside down parabola, so I know it kind of goes like that. Can you see that too? Do you get what I'm saying there? Because this tells me that 4 is a root or a 0 or an x-intercept. This tells me that 2 is one of the x-intercepts or the roots or the zeros. And this negative 1 in front means it's an upside down parabola. And then way back to the beginning here, what is that? In what form is this in again up here? That's vertex form. And if that's vertex form, the vertex must be 3, 1. And there it is. There's our vertex at 3, 1. Yes?
So instead of factoring out the -1, could you divide by -1?
Yes, but you're going to have to keep that -1 around, because if you make it just disappear, some people like just try to make the negative disappear and make everything the opposite of what it was, then my parabola wouldn't be upside down anymore. See, I really think the negative needs to be in front. So I think factoring out the -1 works a little easier. That'll keep the -1 in front instead of dividing by -1. It has the same effect, but it gives you a better place to put the -1. Yes?
How do you tell vertex form with the vertex?
Oh, that part's easy. Here's the vertex. It's just you can't trust that one. So it's 3, 1. All right, that was pretty intense. Let's do it again. This time, not negative. Would you please factor that one? Because right now, it's in general form. So generally, it was just multiplied out. And now, if it's in factored form, I'll be able to tell the roots. I can't tell the roots right now, but as soon as I get it in factored form, I'll know the roots, the x-intercepts. I'll know what the thing looks like. So right now, I don't know what it, all I know, I do know one thing. From this form, what do I have? Before I factor it, I have something. Which one's important, the x or the 1 in front of the x, the 6 or the 5? The 5, because the 5 is the what? The y-intercept. I know it goes through 5. But other than that, I don't know what it looks like. I know it's a parabola. Could be this way, could be this way, could be a lot of different things. But I know it goes through 5. Once you get this thing factored, and by now I have given you enough time there, I hope you've already got it. You got it?
Yep.
What is it?
1 and 5.
X plus 1, x plus 5. Okay. So now, careful now. Are the x-intercepts 1 and 5? No. -1 and negative. So here's -1. 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's -5. Do you get this thing must go like this then? All right. Do you get then that we could figure out where this is by running that line down the middle of it? Would you please figure out the vertex? Hint, the axis of symmetry, it's totally stolen that by now, is a good way to find the x of the vertex. The vertex is something, something, and this dotted line down the middle, the axis of symmetry officially, but I like the name axis of symmetry because it'll remind you it's the x. That'll help you find the vertex. So you got to figure out what's exactly between -1 and -5, and have you got it yet? Do you know how to do it? I know the answer is -3, but do you know how to do it? To find that axis symmetry. It's -3. How do you do that? Yes. So -1 and -5, and you add them together makes -6, and then you average them, which means divide by 2, which makes -3. You got it. How many of you knew that this was at x equals -3? Okay, good. Now, I know some of you did it by just looking at it and going, well, what's exactly between -1 and -5? That works. But do you realize we could ask you for the axis of symmetry, even if it was like 2.5 is one of the roots, and the other one's at like 1 3/4? Ugh. Well, all you got to do is average them. If you have to find exactly what's between, let's say this one's at 9 and this one's at 13.5. Ugh, it's icky to try to figure that out in your head, but you can just add 9 and 13.5 and divide by 2. Average them. You find out exactly what runs right between the middle of them. All right, so where does that leave us with a vertex? Well, we know that the x is -3. What do I do with that? Plug it in. Plug it in where? You can actually plug it in here, or you could plug it in here. It's easier for me once it's in factored form to stick it in there. -3 goes here, -3 goes here. That makes -2. That makes +2. That's something that's unusual. It always happens is you always get opposites, and then you multiply them. So final answer in that case, -4. -3, -4 is where the vertex was. Other little questions they could have asked you. Does this parabola have a minimum or a maximum? Minimum, because it's got a low spot. The lowest spot on it. Does it have a maximum? No, because it keeps going forever. So there's no maximum. Keeps going. All right. Other questions they could have asked you? What is the vertex form of this equation? Ooh, now that I know the vertex, everybody try to write me vertex form for this equation. I'll pause while you give that a try. Okay, Lisa, give this one a shot. Starts with y equals. Yep. X plus 3. You used the opposite of this one. Awesome. Keep going. Yep. No. So close. Because we trust the stuff on the outside, we leave this the way it was. So -4. Raise your hand if you had that right. I'm guessing it's only a few of you. Holy cow. Okay. Awesome. All right. Then, from this, is this just the y-intercept? No, you need to remember a saying. The y-intercept will be where what? X equals 0. So do you get if I put in a 0 right here? It's not just going to come out to -4. It's going to come out to 9 minus 4, which would actually be 5. Okay. So the y-intercept is where what? X equals 0. And the x-intercept is where what? Y equals 0. So is this a good form to figure out the the x-intercept where y is 0? No, this doesn't work nice at all. Set that equal to 0 and solve it. I could do it, but it would not be easy. Do you get if it was factored? It's a lot easier to find these two answers if I've got it in factored form. So different forms are good for different things, and that's one of your things we're going to test you on too is what's this good for? By good for means that the answer is just right there. Not you can figure out everything from that if you know what you're doing. You can figure out the vertex, which isn't there. You can figure out the roots, which isn't there. But what's there? What's this good for? It tells me the y-intercept. That thing right there. It also could be said that this tells me A, B, and C. In a quadratic, they're a big deal because that goes into the quadratic formula. So those are the two things you can get out of this. You can know A is 1, B is 3, and C is -5. And then you could also say that that's the y-intercept. What's this good for? Let's say it factored to this. It doesn't, but let's say it did. Actually, let me think. Does this actually, no, this one actually won't factor nice. So that's another good point. They don't all factor. But when we ask you to factor them, they'll be able to factor. Okay. So if I've got this is, well, I can find the vertex, but it is not easy. There's another form that's way better for telling me the vertex because I can just see it. The vertex is not this and this. So this doesn't tell you the vertex. What does it tell you? The x-intercepts, also known as the roots, the zeros. Okay. And last but not least is the one you were just referencing. Let's say I give you that. Let me make the numbers different just so I can reference them. I can tell you the x and the y of the what? The vertex. So that's what that form is handy for, is telling me the vertex. All right. Do you get how to get this to be in general form? Generally, you just have to multiply them out. Okay. Once I get it all multiplied out, then I could factor it if I wanted to. Does everything factor? No. But if we ask you to factor it, we'll make them factor. All right. Now, today's on factoring when it's the simple kind of factoring. Tomorrow's factoring is going to be like this, but I think you guys could even handle this right now. Let me see if you can factor that. But even before I factor it, I could just say, oh, I know the y-intercept. The y-intercept's 1. At least I know one thing before I start. This is tomorrow's stuff, where the lead coefficient is not 1. This stuff is so tough. That's why I introduced the top 20 early on, is so that this time would be easier. Otherwise, if you're not at all good at factoring by now, if you're terrible at it, then this stays really tough. Did you know it's 2x and x? It's always good to know how to start, right? Because that's the only way to get 2x squared. Then, this is where these old rules break down. The old rules said these two things have to multiply to this and add to that. They don't. They don't anymore. They do have to multiply to 1, though. That's still true, and therefore, I know what they are. What do they have to be?
1.
1 and 1. And then, is there any negatives in this whole thing? Then there's no negatives now. So this has to be positives. There, done. Can't be anything else. Now, if my life depended on it, though, I'd probably multiply it out to make sure it actually worked. Okay? 2x squared. Outside, 2x. Inside, 1x. And the last 1 times 1 is 1. And that conveniently adds up to 3x. So yay, I know I did it right. And what's good about this form? Now I see something else I didn't know before. I knew what the y-intercept was before, but now I know the roots. X equals -1. And this one's a little tricky to do in your head. Don't just guess at it. A lot of people go, oh, I think it's 2 over 1. Or no, it's 1 over 2. No, wait, it's -1 over 2. It's like so, just like a guessing game. Don't do that. Just do just a little bite-sized equation, and then it's super easy. Just set that equal to 0. X equals -1/2. What are these two things? They are the roots, the zeros, the x-intercepts, the solutions. There's 4 names for them. If I wanted to find that little spot that's right in between them, do you get to be a real pain in the butt this time? But it's not impossible. Here's where -1 is. Here's where -1/2 is. What's exactly between -1 and -1/2? -3/4 would be exactly between them. Otherwise, you could add them together, -1.5, and then divide by 2. You get dividing by 2 is the same as multiplying by 1/2. That's why it's -3/4. Okay, cool. Now, that's a review of a lot of things. Let's see how much of that stuck. This is similar to the one you did at the beginning of the hour, but it's different. I'd like you to find for me a whole bunch of things. Hint, you're going to want to make a picture of this using graph paper. Okay. So number 1, I want you to graph it. That's going to be one of the things you'll have to do. And where do you even start with that? Well, if you got nothing else, go to the XY chart. It solves any graph. But I like to use vertex form. Since that's vertex form, start with the vertex. All right. And number 2, I want you to tell me the x-intercepts, also known as roots, zeros. They're all the same thing. Number 3, you should be able to tell me the y-intercept. Where does it touch the y? And if nothing else, you should know that little saying, the y-intercept is where what? Okay? We got the x and the y-intercepts. You can also tell me the axis of symmetry. It's that little line that runs right down the middle of the parabola. If you got the picture drawn, it's easy. Otherwise, if you kind of know where the vertex is, it's also pretty easy. Axis of symmetry. Number 5, I want to know what general form is. And once you got it in general form, you should be able to factor it. And if you weren't able to figure out its x-intercepts until then, once you factor it, it'll be easy to see the x-intercepts. All right, I'm going to pause for a minute. This is like a really intense review question. It covers everything, not everything, but a lot of the things you'll need to know on your test, which isn't until Friday. So if you're not totally solid yet, it's okay. You got some time to learn. But I have covered it all at least once now. I'll pause and give that. Okay. At some point, you're going to have gotten this far. Did anybody already get that far and you already have the general form already all multiplied out? Okay, a few of you did. All right. At this moment, to be able to factor it, remember you have to factor out a -1. And what does that mean? Everything becomes its what? Its opposite. So this becomes positive x squared plus 6x plus 8. And you need that -1 there because otherwise this one's an upside down parabola. It's got a negative in front of it. If I just let that negative drop and act like it's not there, then my equation won't be right because I won't have an upside down parabola. I need that -1 there, but I need it factored out. Then your final answer is, can you factor that puppy? This is pretty intense. I'll pause again while you finish. Okay, I got the feeling that there's some sincere learning just happened there. That's good. After you got this factored to x plus 4 and x plus 2, you have factored form. That's factoring it. That was number 6. Raise your hand if you got x plus 4 and x plus 2. Good. Don't forget the -1's still there. Otherwise, your parabola has flipped to right side up because it started off upside down. It's better still be upside down. Better have that negative there. Okay, next up, general form. This was general form when we had it right here. That's general form, GF. This is factored form, FF. You can abbreviate for those anyway. Okay, that's 5. How about axis of symmetry? Well, if I made a picture of it, you're supposed to graph it anyway, right? I would like this part to be done when it's here, because factored form is so nice for graphing. I know it hits here at -2, and I know it hits here at -4, and I know it's upside down, which means it goes like this. Cool. I'm pretty much done, except what's the axis of symmetry then? It runs right between them at x equals what? -3. If you didn't make a picture, you might have thought the answer was 3. But if you make a picture, hopefully you'd see that we're over on the negative side here. All right. So there's the axis of symmetry is x equals -3. The y-intercept must be way down here because I can't even see it on my graph, right? That one I wouldn't probably do by graphing. The y-intercept is where, finish that sentence, x equals 0. So I go stick in x equals 0. Any form you want. I might as well stick it in up here. Stick in 0, and then I get, that's 9. Then I negative it. I make it negative. -9 plus 1, -8. The y-intercept is -8. Now, if I wanted to write that as an ordered pair, the y-intercept is x is 0, it'd be 0, -8. And if I look at this, doesn't it make sense that it would be down like down here at x equals negative something? All right. Or sorry, y equals -8. All right, so that was your y-intercept. And it came from either making a graph and finding it, or the y-interceptors were x equals 0, so we stuck 0 in up here. And then the roots. The roots, I think we already have those on the graph here. -2 and -4 were the roots. And if they're x-intercepts, they're where y equals 0, right? I think it's safest to put them like that. I think that's the most likely way we're going to ask for them on the test, is as points. And if they're y-intercepts, x has got to be 0. If they're x-intercepts, y's got to be 0. All right, and our graph's right here. And that would have been a good enough graph. Okay, cool. That's like everything. Now, I don't feel like we need to focus on factoring that much, so I'm just going to ask you to do the evens on tonight's worksheet. Okay, so you have a worksheet in the folder for today. Just do the evens. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and I think if there's one that's most important, it's a summary one like this. It's got a whole bunch of parts, and that's number 18. It's got a whole bunch of parts on your worksheet. The very last one is the most important one because it covers like a ton of things that are on the test. The ones that are earlier are just factoring, and I hope you're already good at those. If you realize, you know what, everybody else seems to know how to factor and I don't, this is the time to finally learn it. Come in the morning. Come in on Wednesday. I can invite you to master. You can just show up. Otherwise, Thursday morning would be your last chance to get some help Thursday morning. Now, is Thursday morning an early release or a late start?
Late start.
Okay. So that's going to make it interesting. I'll figure out more about what my help hours would be on Thursday. Okay, that's all I got for you for today.